You could probably watch this one at 1.5x, 2 if you're really special. Let's go.
Smith, the Air Force veteran and YouTuber Jake Broe. Well, welcome to all of you. Let me just start with you, Jake, if I may. We're really at a very critical moment, it seems to me, for the world order, in a sense, in that what happened in the Oval.
We're seeing the beginning stages of the implementation of the New World Order. Something that was a conspiracy theory not that long ago seems to have been forgotten by all the truth, quote unquote, truth tellers, and now is mainstream news. Welcome to the New World Order. I thought we were against this, right? What is the New World Order? Well, increased authoritarianism and the loss of liberty, right?
Office on Friday.
At least.
Sent shockwaves around the world about whether America was going to continue being with Europe when it came to issues like the invasion of a sovereign democratic European country by a Russian dictator. How concerned are you that we might see a genuine fracturing here?
New World Order.
Last Friday was shocking, but unfortunately I'm not surprised. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance just trashed the 80-year transatlantic partnership that has kept all of us safe in the Western world. And now all of our allies are asking, can we trust Donald Trump? Can we trust the United States? Are they a good faith partner? Canada is already preparing.
What's going on with Andrew Wilson's nose, man? Why is he incessantly sniffing? Now, when Zelensky does some shit like that, we all know what the narrative is. Keep the same energy.
For the worst. And now all of our partners in Europe, as well as our partners in the Asia Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, the entire democratic world is wondering, will the United States honor their commitments? If a treaty has been signed by the U.S. Congress, Donald Trump can't arbitrarily break it. That's in violation of federal and international law. But right now, Donald Trump says, I have the power to do whatever I want. I can make law. I can discern what the law is. Nobody can stop me. Nobody can check me. And we've entered a new age. I don't think anyone alive today really remembers what it was like back in the age of empires, prior to World War I, prior to World War II. And that's what Donald Trump and the Putinists in our own government want to do. The United States wants to ally. Our government wants to ally with Russia against our smaller, weaker, democratic, traditional allies.
New World Order.
These alliances were built on shared values. Respecting democracy, international law, human rights, 3 things that Donald Trump doesn't care about.
3 things that Andrew Wilson has rebelled against, spoken out against many times.
3 things that Vladimir Putin doesn't care about. And if the American people don't rise up now and put a stop to this, then we're going to have a lot more wars.
Okay.
A lot more wars, as Xi wants to redraw the maps, Putin wants to redraw the maps, and Trump wants to redraw the maps.
All very reasonable points. Whether he's right or wrong, time will tell. But it makes perfect sense, right? Trump is talking about invading America's neighbors. I mean, come on. Let's be honest people.
Okay. Andrew Wilson, your response to that?
Yeah, so I mean, more panic mongering from the stupid leftists. So,
ad hominem attacks, will he address the arguments?
Anything they can do to say, oh, Zelensky's a hero. This guy, by the way.
He didn't say any of this. Straw man. This is the left-right dialectic, right? This is how Andrew Wilson has popularized himself in YouTube, right? By pushing the left-wing, right-wing fake dialectic and profiting from it.
Paradox of freedom, who's pressing people into service in his country, don't want to go, while he's in a great battle for freedom. He went to the White House and completely embarrassed himself. He decided.
So Zelensky is a dictator, he's saying.
To have a massive.
He's violating human rights, something that Andrew Wilson doesn't give a fuck about.
Argument in front of the American people, which should not have happened, in the middle of trying to get some type of peace treaty together on behalf of his own nation. The leftists hold him.
Okay, so I don't know if this guy follows politics or if he just, there was no peace treaty on the table. What US and Zelensky were negotiating was a minerals deal. And since the Trump administration didn't offer him any security guarantees, meaning no way to uphold peace, Zelensky rejected, as any intelligent person would, very unfavorable no deal, essentially, with no meaningful, no hope for any kind of peace. Even now, weeks later, all that they're negotiating so far is a fake ceasefire that neither side seems to be able to respect.
Accountable? Of course not. Instead, somehow, it's always Donald Trump's fault. By the way, this is our...
So this is the left right wing dialectic, right? Get you off the issues, what's actually happening, and just, talk about the LGBT, lesbians, crazy leftists, and all this other fucking nonsense that got us here in the first place, allowed reasonable people to accept New World Order, to give up their rights because, they're going to get the gays too, take away their rights. I'm willing to give up my rights if we just get them too, right? I've talked about this many times.
Treasure, my money that's going over to Ukraine in order to fund this rapidly growing bloodbath that you so desperately want. Well, at the same time, you say, well, Andrew, don't you think that it's all because Putin is so bad? It's like, look, there's no good guys here. Stop pretending that
Now, to be fair, Jake Broe is very much embedded in this left-wing, right-wing nonsense dialectic. He also pushes it, which is why both he and Andrew Wilson are propped up. And yes, he does believe, Zelensky is a good guy and Putin's the bad guy. Fair enough, but that's not the argument he's making here. And there's more to it than just that. It's not just about these two individuals. It's about all the innocent people dying on, well, maybe both sides. Definitely the Ukrainian side, right? That's what this is ultimately about. It's a question of what's right and wrong, morality, right? Something a Christian supposedly should understand. What's up with Andrew's facial twitching, constantly touching himself, doing something off camera, and sniffing all the time? What's going on? And then the energy. He's definitely keeping the same type of energy, huh?
I need to follow this dialectic that there's good guys who are involved in this. Ukraine was always a corrupt government. The Russian government's a corrupt oligarchical government, and they're at war with each other. And I don't want my treasure to go over there, and I don't want my kids to go over there and fight a war.
So if Donald Trump sides with either side, he's siding with the bad guys, which, well, could mean that he's a bad guy too, right? And so far, he's siding with Russia. That's obvious. He's pushing Russian propaganda.
I'm sorry, but I think that we will refrain from entering into another European theater. As you bring up, people don't really understand what it was like, these pre-imperial dynasties. Yeah, the thing is,
entering into another European theater, U.S. has been for decades deeply embedded in the European theater. If it's going to do anything now, what it looks like is going to withdraw. Does this guy not know what's going on in the geopolitically in the world, like at all?
it's like we do have grandparents or great grandparents left alive who were part of these European theaters, and they were bloodbaths, absolute bloodbaths. And what we need right now is a peace treaty, not any more of your cocksure posturing about the good guy Zelensky and the bad guy Putin. It's a false dialectic, and I'm sick of it.
Left wing, right wing, right? False dialectic. And he didn't address anything Jake Broe said at all. Just ad hominems, straw men, nasty energy, personal attacks. I mean, can you address the argument?
Dave Smith, it's very interesting to me to see the difference between the way a lot of people in America are viewing all this, particularly the Oval Office showdown, and the way countries like the UK here or European countries are viewing it. But ultimately, everybody would like to see peace. Do you think we're more or less near to a peace settlement than we were before Friday?
Oh, I think we're closer to one, and I think that's great. And Andrew is spot on. And look, I mean, I know I've said this before on your show, Piers, here, but when you hear this fear mongering about the Putinists in our government, I mean,
So he was asked about if we're closer to peace, right? He said he thinks so. Where are the arguments? No arguments. He's just doing the same thing that Andrew is doing. He's attacking the other side, right? Getting you engaged in this false dialectic.
look, at least during Joseph McCarthy in the Senate and in the House on Un-American activities, during what is known now as McCarthyism, at least back then there were some actual communists. The idea that there are Putinists within our government is...
So this is one of the tactics that is irrational, right? Like to use. They just ridicule, right? Instead of addressing their arguments, they just put a smirk on their face and call you names and ridicule, right? This is fucking cultural Marxism, clown.
Just ridiculous. And, I love how everybody freaks out when Donald Trump is doing what is the scariest thing in D.C., talking about potentially ending a war. And then we hear these lectures about, like, the power of the president. Meanwhile, Barack Obama, not that long ago, forget, obviously, the Constitution is very clear that...
So this is another tactic that they use, right? When you accuse, let's say, Trump in this case, obviously, of usurping too much power, right? And then equate that with a moral wrong. What they do is they go to Obama in this case and say, Obama did it too. So what's the conclusion I'm supposed to draw here, right? Donald Trump is good because he's doing the same bad things that Obama did? That's fucking incoherent. Fuck Obama. Yeah, this is the problem, right? Or this is maybe the solution. This is the explanation. Left, right, dialectic is bullshit. All that bickering and fighting and the theater, that's for morons. That's to dupe the people. But in reality, U.S. Policy, whether it be domestically or foreign policy, is more or less lockstep, right? It doesn't matter who's in the White House. The policy has been continually, whether it's the left or the right, anti-globalist policy, right? And globalists are the bad guys, supposedly.
Congress has to declare a war. We haven't declared a war since World War II, but at least George W. Bush got like some authorizations from the Congress. Barack Obama went to war in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen. Not even anything from Congress. And we don't hear a freak out about like the power of the president until one is actually discussing the possibility of ending a war. And look, I mean, what Zelensky did in the Oval Office is...
A lot of people have called Obama a dictator. They've talked about him abusing executive orders, right? The people that aren't committed to the left or the right. Yeah, okay. When Obama was doing bad, people on the right were yelling dictator. When Trump is doing some of the same things, now the left are yelling dictator, and the other side was maybe defending him, in many instances. This is the right-left dialectic. This is how divided people are. I mean, it's just so fucking obvious, right? Fuck Obama, fuck Trump. They both suck, and they're both pushing the United States in the same direction.
It's got to be the greatest strategic blunder that I've ever seen in my life. For him to think that when he is in a...
I mean, talk about hysteria. Exactly, the greatest strategic blunder he's seen in his life, right? Not Hitler going into Russia without like proper, winter gear or supply lines, food, whatever. Yeah, I mean, the greatest strategic blunder, not Hitler as he was conquering Eastern Europe, instead of conscripting the Slavs to help them fight their mortal historical enemy, USSR, Russia, but treating them the same way as Russians had done forever, exterminating them, murdering them, putting them in concentration camps, instead of conscripting them into his army and using them to destroy the Soviet Union, right? That wasn't a great one. What Zelensky did, in the Oval Office by refusing um, a no deal, basically, to just give up his country's natural resources for what? Not even a promise of security guarantees? That was a strategic. To sign that deal would have been a blunt. Who is this guy?
Desperate situation, completely reliant on Donald Trump. He thought the weight.
Okay, you cannot underestimate U.S.'s role in supporting Ukraine up until this point. Without U.S., it's likely that Ukraine would have fallen already. But he's not completely dependent on the United States, right? Uh, Europe is picking up the slack, and if they do, and give them, for example, that $300 billion in Russian frozen assets to support their native military industrial complex, which is quite impressive, actually, what Ukraine has been able to do and develop, and the things they've been able to do to the Russians. Um, also of their own with their own agency and whatever. If they get that, let's say $300 billion, that will be more than twice what the United States had given them over the course of 3 years. That's going to be incredible to get that kind of money to build all these drones and you know, come on. Uh, Europe has also supported Ukraine no less than the United States. Now, Europe's not as powerful, don't get me wrong, but to say that he's completely dependent on Trump, well, that just isn't true.
To accomplish this was to go in there and try to out alpha Donald Trump in a language he barely.
But this is what this shit is about for all these red pill dorks, right? Alpha, alpha. They don't even know what alpha means. Donald Trump, who is in his home with Secret Service right there, all his buddies, just his whole government is there, and Zelensky is there with like 2 or 3 guys, right? He's a much smaller man. He's surrounded. He's in the lion's den, and he's standing up for himself. And Trump is getting all emotional, staying calm, right? And Trump is getting all emotional, yelling and screaming and Vance is stepping into to his rescue, and that's an alpha, a guy that has all the power, is in a position of power right there because of all these external factors, is bitching and moaning, yelling and screaming, trying to dominate the other guy, right? Trying to fuck him basically on a shit deal. And the other guy, who's in the lion's den, physically smaller, keeps his cool, but just says no and stands up to him. These fucking clowns have no clue what an alpha is. It's been said before, many times by many people, Donald Trump is a weak man's strong man. He's not a strong man, he's a bully. If he were a strong man, he would stand up to someone like Putin. He doesn't. He's weak. He's propped up. He's fake. He's a puppet.
Really speaks. I mean, he did the biggest disservice to his own country and this entire effort. But you know what?
Just rhetoric. Rhetoric. Where are the arguments? Evidence.
Fine with that, because the whole thing is that America was never supposed to be a global empire, and the American people don't want to be a global empire. We're supposed to be a constitutionally limited republic, and there is no such thing as a constitutionally limited world empire. We should get out of the empire business. It's been nothing but a disaster for the American people.
Well, let me bring in.
America was never supposed to be what it is today. And is it supposed to be that which you are pushing it to be, the direction you want to go in, right? I don't know about this guy, but Andrew Wilson, fascism, he got this nickname, Big Papa Fascist, and they like to joke around how it's just a nickname. No, his ideas are fascistic, no doubt about it. And what he's really doing is trying to trivialize fascism. Like, come on, guys, it's just fascism. It's no big deal, right? So this, sort of traditionalism or conservatism or whatever you want to call it, that America is supposed to be something that it was at one point, right? At the point of its, well, when it was first founded, conceived of, it also held slaves. Like, do we go back to that, or do we just cherry pick this idea that, like, the country, the foundation of the country should never change. Okay, fair enough, right? The United States has a constitution that Donald Trump is shitting all over right now. But that's somehow cool. I mean, can this guy start making sense? Or be, keep the same energy when it comes to Donald Trump too? And his leftism?
Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, retired US commander in Europe. General, great to have you on Uncensored. You've heard there the conflicting views from your perspective, with all your extensive military background. What did you make, first of all, of what you saw in the Oval Office on Friday?
Well, thanks for the privilege. And extensive military service is another way of saying I'm really old. So thanks for the euphemism.
My apologies for the ageist way I framed that.
Look, I have to say, Friday was one of the hardest days for me I've had in a long time. It was very difficult to watch how President Zelensky was treated in there, and look, you could criticize his as Dave just did, the fact that he pushed back there in the Oval Office, but you know what? I mean, he's leading a country that's fighting for its survival, and he was being bombarded with absolute false information. And it also
being called a dictator and all this other nonsense, right?
Revealed to me, or made it clear to me, that the people around the president do not understand the nature of war or why people fight. This notion that, look, you got to stop, you don't have the cards. George Washington sure didn't have the cards. The Taliban didn't have the cards. The Vietnamese did not have the cards, but yet all of them defeated much larger, technically superior forces. And so I think that what's missing from this is a clarity of what is our strategic objective. What are we trying to accomplish? What do we want in Europe? Why does Ukraine matter? It's not charity, obviously. It's because the Chinese are watching to see, are we serious when we talk about respect for sovereignty, respect for international law, respect for freedom of navigation. And if the Chinese see that we're not even willing to do this in Europe, then I don't think they'll be very impressed with what we say and do in the Indo-Pacific. And of course, our economy is tied to Europe. The biggest trading bloc in the world, or the trading relationship, is between Europe and the United States. And so if Ukraine fails, you're going to see about another 10 million Ukrainian refugees heading into Poland and Germany and Western Europe. That affects us. So the Biden administration failed to do it. The Trump administration has not yet done it, to say our strategic objective.
Now, this is his military training, if you will, background. But that's one thing I respect about Hodges. He doesn't play the left wing, right wing dialectic, right? He doesn't engage in that. He stands outside of it.
Before I go to Andrew to respond to that, General, just from a pure military perspective, is there any way Ukraine can either win this war with enough support or chuck Russia out of the 20% of Ukraine it's currently occupying? Are either of those two things remotely achievable?
Absolutely. Look, this war has been going on 11 years. 11 years, and Russia still, with every advantage.
Man, the incessant sniffing and face twitching. Andrew, what's going on, man?
Only controls 20% of Ukraine. They have gone a total of 60 kilometers in the last year from Avdiivka to the outskirts of Prokhorovsk. That's it, despite enormous advantages and huge casualties. The great Russian Black Sea Fleet, nobody even talks about them anymore. The Russian Air Force failed its two main tasks, achieve air superiority and interdict the lines of communication from Poland and Ukraine. They're not able to do it. So it's clear that the Russians do not have the ability to break through or overrun the Ukrainian defenders the way their grandfathers did in the Second World War. That just doesn't exist. So, and this is without the United States actually committing, or European countries actually committing to helping Ukraine win. The Biden administration never could say, we want Ukraine to win. And so you ended up with this sort of drip, drip, drip support. And of course, I think if the Europeans are finally waking up, they realize that they are going to pay an enormous price if Ukraine fails. And so about 50% of the ammunition that's produced in Europe today goes to customers in the Middle East and in Africa. So it's not like they don't have industrial capacity. They have not yet shown the political will or the strategic backbone to do what needs to be done.
Okay.
Take that 300 billion and give it to Ukraine and have Ukraine invest in your military industrial complex.
Andrew Wilson, some people on the conservative right in America want to see Zelensky resign and have somebody else to deal with here. What do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, there hasn't been he suspended all elections in his nation and probably shouldn't be the sitting president.
But
right? He's pushing the Kremlin line. He's a dictator. What Trump did, right? Called him a dictator.
Hang on that point, though, just to be clear, the country remains under martial law. So it was supposed to have an election, I think, last April, May.
If this happened here in the United States, these guys would be screaming bloody murder that Trump was a dictator.
Okay, so this is not an argument, right? Can you provide some evidence that this would happen? Well, obviously you can't. Well, maybe you could if you could look into the past where they have acted in such a manner in an analogous situation. So do it. Provide the evidence.
That he was a neo-Nazi, that he was a fascist authoritarian. If this happened under martial law in the
So this is not an argument.
United States, these guys would be screaming for blood right now. For some reason, though, when it's Zelensky, it's fine because it's under martial law. That makes it all better. They can press people into service. That's okay. They don't mind that.
But how
so they're not doing any of that, right? Andrew is. He just called Zelensky a dictator. Implied that, right? That's all of a sudden he seems to care about human rights and this type of shit when he's a fascist. Like, it's completely incoherent, right? He's the one calling Zelensky a dictator.
Okay, but how could they? But Andrew, how could they realistically have a free and fair election, given that 6.5 million Ukrainians have left the country as refugees?
Perhaps they could.
Hang on. Let me finish. 3.5 million more are living under Russian occupation, so clearly can't vote freely or fairly in the way they may wish to. Plus, they're still at war, so there's a front line which has thousands and thousands more Ukrainians battling it out every day who wouldn't be able to vote either. How does this election even happen? Never mind the fact that under their constitution, which got parliamentary massive support, dictates they can't have an election while they're under martial law anyway. But how do you have a free, fair election, given those set of circumstances?
Yeah, perhaps you couldn't.
Perhaps. What do you mean, perhaps?
No, there are war-torn regions before which have had elections,
but you could. That's what he means, right? You could.
Let's just grant for a second that you couldn't. So what? These guys would still be screaming bloody murder if the shoe was on the other foot here in the United States, and it was impossible for us to do a free and fair election.
Nobody did when.
Right. So now Piers is going to a historical example to provide evidence, which is what Andrew's supposed to be doing because it's his argument.
The UK
would still be screaming about it.
But nobody did when the UK didn't have an election for 10 years before and during World War II.
So his quote-unquote argument is they would believe me, right? I have no evidence to show you that this has ever happened before, but it will because I say so.
Everybody understood. There was no criticism of that. There was
a different
realization.
Era with people who weren't lunatics, and now the left is a bunch of lunatics.
There you go. He just told on himself, right? People who call a guy a dictator under these very circumstances and make these ridiculous claims that Andrew just did, pushing Russian propaganda that Trump has been pushing. Those people are lunatics. They're leftist lunatics. Shout out to Piers Morgan by placing these guys in the order in which they exist on a true political spectrum, right? Andrew and Smith, I think, are leftists, and the guys on the right are more right-wing, right? They're pro-liberty, and the guys on the left are pro-authoritarianism, right? Left versus right. I wish they knew this.
They apply a double standard, and they have what is called the paradox of freedom. And right now, they don't care that people are being pressed in the front lines. He brings up Washington, who was using a...
Once again, right? people are being pressed onto the front lines. Dictator. After he called people who do this leftist lunatic. It's all a projection with this guy.
Volunteer militia. Nobody was getting pressed into service in order to fight off the British. These people are lunatics and they're bloodthirsty monsters ultimately.
So this is a Marxist tactic, right? Just attack ad hominems, basically, right? Don't allow people to have a say in a debate. Just shout them down, scream them down, call them, moralize the issue, right? Call them crazy, lunatics, insane, right? Just get all hopped up on whatever the fuck he's hopped up on, and be aggressive, right? This is a Marxist tactic.
Anytime we try to move towards peace, as Dave Smith rightly points out,
these are alpha males, right? They're bitches.
These people want to do.
You want to see alpha males? Look at the calm, respectful gentleman on the right. Military man. Those are alphas. The two of you are bitches.
Everything possible to not do that because, oh, Putin might get a W. It's like, look, ultimately, I'm going to say this again, reiterate it again.
So he never said any of that. This is more strawman arguments.
Yeah. Neither one of these are the good guys. Ukraine has a corrupt government, has a history of corruption. The Putin and Russia, history of corruption. Very, very bad countries doing very bad things to each other. The Europeans didn't, if they cared so much.
What Trump is aligning himself once again with Putin. He is destroying the rule of law, ignoring the laws. He's trampling on people's freedoms. Right. For now, it's, the freaks and, well, maybe not the freaks yet. I'm not sure. Maybe not yet. But immigrants, right? There's some people bandying about this idea that innocent people, now they might not be legal immigrants, fair enough, but that doesn't mean they get to go to Bukele's prison, right? I mean, he's just throwing people in prison. Trump is effectively without a trial. That's scary as fuck, guys. But just because the prison is in South America, well, so what? That makes it okay somehow?
How come they only recently started to actually fund this? When Trump got into office, there was only 4 of them, 4 countries, including ours, that even had 3% of its GDP going to this conflict until Trump demanded it. So it's like, no, I don't buy this narrative that, we've always cared about our treaty. You cared when our treasure's going over there and funding the entire thing, right? Suddenly there's a blank check. I'm sure that the corrupt Ukrainian government loves having our blank checks go over there where they pocket half of it and only half of it goes to the war effort.
Evidence? I mean, this is just rhetoric. And it's all lies. Where's the evidence?
Trust any of these people.
All right, Jake, I mean, there's no doubt, I said this.
Do you trust Trump? He lies all the time.
The moment Donald Trump first started talking about NATO being potentially obsolete.
But he makes a good argument that, Europe needs to step up. No doubt about it. They need to step up. But does he really want that?
The member countries didn't pay their basic financial dues, which they weren't doing in the main. There's no doubt, given how many more are now paying their dues or more, that memo got loudly received. But Europe is still most countries.
Man, that nasal drip is crazy. That's why he needs them cigarettes, man, to balance him the fuck out. He's got a little bit too excited there, bro.
This country,
Christian,
UK, have not been stepping up properly on their own defences. And there comes a point, does there not, where I completely understand why a lot of Americans are simply done with being the global police officer. Why should they be? If the Europeans aren't prepared to take their own defences seriously enough, why should America constantly feel obliged to come in and spend American taxpayer money on bailing them out?
The honest answer is because America has been writing the security policy for these countries since World War II. If America makes all the decisions, America calls the shots in this alliance, what incentive is there for our allies to spend increased amounts?
That's a very good point. So because the United States has been dictating European policy to a large degree, right, that means they got to have skin in the game. If you're going to call the shots, you know, you got to compensate these people. You got to invest. It is what it is. Now, on the other hand, Trump has been talking about, and other presidents been talking about pulling out of Europe for quite some time now. So Europe has had ample warning to, and they've been dragging their feet, something I've criticized them for. So that's fair too, right? But uh, you can't just put all the blame on Europe, right? Uh, if you want to put most of the blame, I'm fine with that, no problem. But at the same time, the reason why U.S. has been spending all this money in Europe on their defense is because they got to call the shots. I mean, they told Germany what type of an army they could have. You know, they've been the boss, big bad boss. Now they don't want to be Uncle Sam anymore. That's fine. You know what I mean? We're in a transition period, and yes, Europe needs to step up. But let's not act like United States was just doing this out of the goodness of their heart. You know what I mean? They were benefiting from this relationship too. Now it's been deemed no longer beneficial. Globalism is no longer beneficial because it has allowed the rise of Russia and China. And in my opinion, globalism has been conspiracy theory. Globalism was instituted. Also, it's had a lot of benefits. It's allowed the standard of living globally to um, go up. So that's good. But I think it's also been pushed by people like Kissinger, for example, and a lot of U.S. presidents, European leaders, in order to, or the shadow government more likely, to build up Russia and China to challenge and destroy U.S. hegemony, right? To bring about the new world order.
Should they have been meeting that 2% NATO guideline? Of course they should. But they were lulled into a false sense of security, both from the United States and from the Russians. This entire plan of making Europe dependent on Russian energy exports, nations that trade together don't go to war with each other, we now know that's a lie. This was a post-communist collapse experiment. What if we economically intertwined ourselves with the Chinese, with the Russians? We make this globalization effort in order to connect them. That way, they won't want to risk their trade partners in order to go to war with their neighbors. And what we've learned in the last 3 years is that we were wrong. We never should have made our economy, our energy needs dependent on either the Chinese or the Russians, because they're dictatorships and they're authoritarians and they want to be empires. They want to invade their smaller, weaker neighbors or topple their governments, either create proxy states or redraw the maps. So now nobody can deny the reality. Nobody can deny the truth. Every democracy in the world has to reevaluate their trade partnerships and their food and energy supplies, because you cannot be reliant on dictators. You cannot
All very reasonable points.
be reliant on either China or Russia, because they will use those trade relations as leverage to get what they want on the battlefield.
So he conceded that, to Andrew's argument a little bit, that Europe needs to step up, no doubt about it, but he also mitigated that with what the circumstances and explained why it has been thus, while also like that's a balanced, fair view.
Concessions from democratic nations that do try to negotiate in good faith. When the Russians and the Chinese will
calmly present it without attacking the opposition, giving them their just due when they do, addressing what they say and conceding when honesty demands that.
never negotiate in good faith. They will always make maximum demands. They will always lie. They will always cheat. They will always steal. You can't trust
He's describing Andrew Wilson and the other guy.
them. You shouldn't be working with them. And right now, Donald Trump is trying to negotiate an aluminum deal with the Russians. Donald Trump is trying to resume direct flights between the United States and Moscow on stolen planes. All of these aircraft that the Russians stole 3 years ago, Donald Trump wants to pretend like it never happened. We're trying to increase diplomatic staff when we know these people are all FSB agents and spies here just to subvert, undermine, and weaken the United States.
In my opinion, now he may not be that exactly, Andrew Wilson, but if he's not a Russian asset. He's a New World Order asset, right? People like to talk about Trump being Putin's bitch. Some people are also saying Putin is now Trump's bitch and he's going to do what he's told. No, they're both Klaus Schwab, Rothschild, Kissinger bitches.
Donald Trump is opening up the gates and making every American less safe and our country weaker. This has been a disaster the last 3 days, and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are the ones driving all of this right now.
Okay, I mean, Dave Smith, I would not share some of that categorization because I don't think this is by any means done, this scenario. I think that Trump ultimately is desperate to bring peace.
Sure he is. I mean, to be fair, the World Economic Forum has told us that the goal is ultimately peace. But before all of that happens, there's going to be a lot of war. Everyone's going to get tired of war. People are going to be so beaten down. They're going to be dead. And they're going to be, they will have suffered so much, they'll accept peace on our terms, right? You're our slave now.
He prefers peace to war. He said he'd do this before he came into office. He wants to get it done, as he does in Gaza as well. He wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize. There are lots of incentives here for
the fighting in Gaza has resumed.
Donald Trump to deliver on what he said he would deliver on. So I don't share that slightly apocalyptic view of where we are. But I also think Jake makes some very good points about, when you dance with the devil, you get pricked by the horns. And a lot of people believe that the way Donald Trump interacts with people like Putin and Xi and Kim Jong-un and others is detrimental to America's national interest. What do you feel?
I mean, this is global politics always involves interacting with bad people, and it only seems.
So do you want U.S. to be isolationist or interacting with these leaders all over the world? Which is it?
Like the propaganda about this, arises when it's somebody who we
Right,
want to support a war.
Because if the United States is involved in all these distant countries' affairs, whether it's militarily or politically, I mean, it's still meddling. It's not really isolationist, right? This could be a sign of weakness that it can't fight them, but it's making deals with them still. It's carving up the world along with these people. So this isn't exactly isolationist.
Against, there's how about the way we interact with the Saudis or the Israelis for that matter. Look, the greatest thing that ever happened in the history of the world has happened over the last 30 years, and there's 1 billion people have been pulled out of extreme poverty.
So let's kill all that, right? This guy is a walking, talking contradiction.
And a big part of that was because Richard Nixon went and talked to Mao Zedong, the most evil man who ever lived by the numbers. And so, look, I just think there's always this fear mongering that is associated with every single war. And, you mentioned age before. I'm old enough to have lived through a lot of these wars right now. America's.
Look at Ben Hodges, who I believe had been in some conflicts. I don't think Jake Broe had, but he served in the military. Maybe he was, I don't know, deployed. This guy is talking about living through wars. He's been through wars, right? Thank you for your service, sir.
Been in a constant state of war since at least 9/11, and of course we know that with the war in Iraq, it was going to be a mushroom cloud over Kansas, right? Saddam Hussein was going to give the weapons that he didn't have to the terrorists he wasn't friends with, and then they were going to nuke America, and they convinced everyone in America that this was the case, and we hear the same thing now, although weirdly,
right, from Kremlin, they're constantly threatening to nuke everybody.
There seems to be something so contradictory here between making the argument that Vladimir Putin is so weak that he can't even take over Ukraine, even though he's been at war with them since 2014 or however.
But he has nukes, as you just pointed out, dumb fuck.
You want to calculate when the war actually started, and yet also he's some huge threat to reconstitute the Soviet Union.
Right, conventionally, when it comes to conventional warfare, Russia is a paper tiger. I'm not saying they're completely weak, but I mean, they could be subdued. They can be beaten. Right? Turkey and Ukraine, with enough support from the West, intelligence, money, arms, would absolutely crush Russia. But the danger is that when you push Russia, if you push Russia too far, they still have nukes, right? So this isn't a contradiction.
Or we just hear it asserted that China will move on Taiwan if Vladimir Putin gets to keep his percentage of Ukraine, which I'm not even saying is impossible, but it's certainly not an inevitability. By the way, I don't think we could do anything if China wanted to move on Taiwan tomorrow. And
We couldn't? Why couldn't we?
I think Americans have to get out of this mindset, this empire mindset. Like, just
So defund the police, right? I'm trying to tell you, these guys are leftists, right? They think that US doesn't need to be the global policeman anymore. And if you defund the police, US stops policing the world, right? There's not going to be more war or anything like that. The neighborhood's going to be safe, guys. Defund the police. It's absolute incoherence and goes against everything these guys say they believe.
for example, imagine, let's just say there was the political will and there was the desire. Let's say that the U.S. wanted to take Mexico City. We had decided we're going to do that. What could Russia do to stop us? What could China do to stop us?
So is the United States powerful or not powerful at all? Now, I understand geography. Yeah, it makes a big difference. But still, the US can project their power like no other nation. So China, Russia don't have the ability to project their power into Mexico, let's say, the way the United States have the ability to project their power into the Pacific, or Russia for that matter. There's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of American troops stationed within, I don't know, 1,000 kilometers from Russia. And the same goes for China. They're it's not the same thing. So on the one hand, US is powerful, but on the other hand, can't do anything about China wanting to take Taiwan. Are you sure about that? I mean, Taiwan is armed to the teeth. Add US military with its NATO allies? I mean, what do you mean they can't do anything?
Nothing. The idea is ridiculous. If we decided we wanted to do that, then we do that, period. Because we're the bigger, stronger country. And that's not great, but it is the way of the world. Look,
Is the mask coming off?
the bottom line here is that people, and I will say like me at this point, because I've been talking about this conflict on big platforms for years at this point.
Thank you for your service, sir.
Now, the head of NATO, Stoltenberg, I always get his name wrong, but he himself said that in late 2021, Vladimir Putin drafted a treaty between Russia and NATO, and what he was asking for was a promise that Ukraine will not become a member of NATO. And he said for that he would not invade. And you know, the people, like you just interviewed the great Jeffrey Sachs before.
Liars, right? I don't trust any of them, and this is why. So Putin's demands, in order not to invade Ukraine, was to push NATO back to 1997 borders, which would have removed American soldiers from Poland, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, and the Balkan countries. Russia has also demanded that NATO rule out further expansion, including the accession of Ukraine into the alliance. It wasn't just Ukraine, it was also rolling back NATO to 1997 borders. This guy is a liar.
And now, oh my God, wouldn't you give anything for that deal? Imagine you could have all of Ukraine, minus Crimea, under Ukrainian control, and all you had to give was a promise of not bringing Ukraine into NATO.
That's all you had to do, right? This guy's a liar. He's a liar. And Ukraine would not have been a sovereign country without Western support. It's so frustrating, man. These people just lie. Oh, and another thing, U.S., NATO had to withdraw its nukes from wherever, however far away from Russia. There was a lot more to that deal than just not, giving Ukraine NATO membership, which it still doesn't have. And it would not have gotten it because there were too many Putinists in NATO countries.
It's geographic integrity from the beginning of the war. This is the reality of the situation. Governments are not perfect.
I guess if you say, I speak the truth enough people will believe you.
And neither is ours, but peace is better than war. This war did not need to happen, and it's been an absolute disaster, worst of all for the Ukrainian people.
On the issue of the election.
Mind blown. Peace is better than war. Wow. What a pacifist.
I think it's worth noting, and I'll come to you, General, if I may, for a response to this, but Ukraine's parliament voted overwhelmingly to approve a resolution affirming the legitimacy of Zelensky's stay in office, asserting the constitutionality of deferring the presidential election while the country...
Not according to the lunatic leftist on the left.
At war. The 268 parliament members present voted unanimously to approve the resolution, while 12 other MPs were not present during the session. So that seems to me to be a very clear democratic mandate by the elected officials of Ukraine to endorse not having an election until the war is over.
Well, some of us may not like the fact that Ukrainian martial law includes a suspension of elections, but that is the law. And so, and then the fact that the Rada made the decision to vote and give that sort of public endorsement, to me, that's compelling. Now, I do want to say, give Dave Smith credit. I finally heard him say something today that I agreed with. This war could have been avoided if we, the West, led by the United States, had responded appropriately after Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, if we had responded appropriately after they invaded Ukraine in 2014, and that's not a game. I mean, the whole world saw Russia invade Ukraine in 2014, and we did nothing when they jumped over the Obama.
Right, the leftists defunded the police. This is simple.
Obama red line in Syria. So this war is a result of failed deterrence, and trying to explain deterrence and spend money for deterrence is always a tough sell because you have to convince taxpayers and voters and legislators of what the risk is and why you have to do it. That's hard, but it is much, much cheaper, obviously, to do that, to have successful deterrence as we did for over 70 years after the Second World War versus dealing with the failed deterrence we're dealing with right now. I think that for Andrew, I would just offer, as I'm pretty sure you know this, the amount of money, the 120 to 180 billion, depending on what you include in that amount, it's clearly not 350, but the amount of money that the United States has spent or contributed towards helping Ukraine, the overwhelming majority of that money was spent in the United States. It's not pallets of ammunition of money that are loaded on.
It's not blank checks either, right? He's fact-checking, Andrew Wilson. Will he, as would be demanded of an honest interlocutor, will he concede?
To a C-17 and then delivered into Ukraine, it's money that is spent replacing or buying ammunition, refurbishing old equipment that is then loaned or given to Ukraine. And of course, there are no U.S. troops in Ukraine except for those officers that are assigned to the embassy and the Office of Defense Cooperation, whose task is to make sure accountability of every javelin, every artillery round, every set of binoculars. Well, you can shake your head if you want to. That's a fact. So
why not just stop pretending that we don't have United States special?
So no concession, right?
Forces on the ground right this second. We don't have CIA agents all over Ukraine right this second. Why don't you?
I mean, it's probable, it's likely, but how about some evidence?
You just stop pretending because it's nonsense, and we all know.
And where's the evidence that he knows this? Maybe he does. I don't know, but where's the evidence? And he's just lying.
Oh, it's nonsense. This is the way. Hang on. This is the way it's been going for a long time. And when you talk about, well, Andrew, what we're actually doing is we're spending a whole...
What's going on with the nose, bro? What's going on? What's up with them bloodshot eyes? Bags under the eyes, bro. What's up? What's going on, Z? Anyway, look, well, I'll get to it in just a
bunch
second.
of money on refurbishing equipment here instead of buying new equipment to send over there. So what? So what? You're still spending tons of my money on something I don't care about to send over to a nation.
So the truth doesn't matter, right? Nuance doesn't matter. So what? So I was lying. I was bullshitting. I was exaggerating what the situation is in order to convince people to come to my side. So what? Who gives a fuck about truth, right? Definitely not pious Christians like myself.
Just corrupt as hell. So can we just stop BSing each other for a second?
Speaking of Christianity, right? You got an Orthodox Christian nation, Russia, attacking Orthodox Christian nation like Ukraine. And you got the Orthodox Christian, Russian Orthodox Christian, Andrew over here, saying that they're both corrupt countries. I'm telling you, this dude he just projects that which he is. He tells on himself all the time. And people just, I don't know how big a dupe you gotta be to just, still believe this guy.
Yes, the United States has boots on the ground there. Yes, we have special forces units there. We have CIA agents there, and we would be fools to pretend we don't.
It's an interesting argumentative style that you had, and I always, when people start calling me names or whatever, then I really, the credibility.
I didn't call you any names, sir. I didn't call you any names.
Okay.
You said he's pretending. You accused him of lying. You called him a liar. Shut the fuck up. You implied it. Jesus. But here's the deal. In the United States, it had always been customary, and still is, to thank military men for their service. Now, I'm not expecting Andrew Wilson to do this. They're in a debate. They're opposed to one another. It would be a good faith gesture. It would make Andrew look good if he did that, but I don't expect that. At the same time, you're taking this in the opposite direction. You're insulting these guys left and right. You're not addressing their arguments. You're projecting your own frailty, weakness, dishonesty, bullshit onto them when they're very reasonable, calm, collect their alpha, and you're squirming like a bitch, yelling at them like an effeminate fool, acting like you have the upper hand in this debate when you're getting your ass handed to you, like you got some kind of moral clarity when clearly you're a corrupt individual, evil man. You don't. But this is the personification of the New World Order versus the Old World Order. Yes, there's probably CIA agents and military boots in some capacity from the United States in Ukraine, and the former general over here is probably aware of that while not allowed to say anything about it. He may not know this for a fact, but he knows how these things work, and what Andrew is saying is probably true. So if you want to accuse him of lying, even though he didn't outright deny it, he did not speak the truth. So yes, the West isn't perfect. It's corrupt. It's got a lot of problems. There's a lot of sinners in the West. There's a lot of people who don't understand necessarily what it is that they're doing. Yes, there's a lot of problems in the West. But at the same time, the West has been more measured, friendlier, has afforded the global population a certain level of raised their standard of living, has protected some people from dictators, has definitely done good things for the world, and is a more rational, right, reasonable. It has a long-standing, whether you like it or not, Andrew, Christian background. and it comes from that culture, and there's definitely good to it. I'm not saying it's an angel and that there are no problems there. I'm not saying that it hasn't been infiltrated by the devil and has done wrong at the behest. Like, there's definitely conflict, and the West isn't perfect, but at the same time it is still rational, it is still good, it still has virtue. And you see it in the way these men who are from that system relate even to their enemies. How humble they are, how there are instances of honesty there. Like, Jake gave Andrew's point credence. He qualified it later, but he conceded because it was the right thing to do, because it was the truth. On the other hand, you have these aggressive, coked up, fucking crazed individuals, self-proclaimed, however accidentally, lunatic leftists, projecting their own bullshit onto everybody else in a very disrespectful manner, while pretending to have lived through wars and shit and have suffered because their money is going somewhere. I mean, this is the personification of where we are. Now, it wouldn't be fair to say good versus evil, but it's definitely evil versus corrupted good. Good is trying to shine through here, but these clowns on the left ain't having it. This is the new world order. Fuck human rights, fuck truth, fuck Christianity. We're just going to pretend like we're the good guys. We have the moral ground, and we're going to shout everybody else down. We're going to force them to do things our way because we have no respect for the individual, their rights, we don't even want them in a conversation. They don't get a say. We need to dominate them. It's not about dialogue. It's not about diplomacy. And they pretend to be peaceful. It's disguised as something good when it's clearly evil.
What was the name that I called you?
I think
A liar.
The key is this idea of trying to
I'm
end
actually just offended by tone. You just don't like tone. You know, maybe a little tone policing getting worked in there. Maybe that southern drawl where you try to make yourself sound likable because you have it doesn't work so well on me.
So you just misrepresented what he was saying, right? He called it tone policing, implying that that's somehow wrong, and then went on to tone police the general. He's just projecting. He's telling you all these things are wrong, and let me do them. They're wrong when you do them, but when I do them, they're correct. Right? This is the morality of Andrew Wilson. If you have a problem with tone policing, why are you tone policing the general? And at the same time, again, calling him a liar, like saying that he's just doing that to be more likable, which is just another projection.
Because you can't gaslight me with this stuff. It's nonsense. Yes, there's boots on the ground there. Yes, there's been boots on the ground there probably since the beginning. Yes, we're spending $100 billion plus.
Okay, evidence. It's probable. I would even say it's likely. Do you have any evidence?
Dollars on equipment.
It doesn't matter whether he has evidence or not. He just outright asserts his belief as, well, God's word, right? And who's God? Well, he.
That we then either send over there. And by the way, there's hidden money going over there too. This is such.
Oh, and there's hidden money off the books, guys. Evidence.
Nonsense. Just stop gaslighting the American people. Stop it. We're not stupid. We've seen this on repeat so many times now. So many times.
General,
So,
respond.
The idea of ending the war, of course, is exactly what we would like to do, but it needs to be an end that is sustainable. And I think President Zelensky understands.
Well, that is the implication of the end, right? No more. That's what it means.
He said he can't just sign or accept.
Anything else is just a pause, not an end. Basic logic, right?
An end to the war where Russia will wait for us to lose interest, because we always do lose interest, and then they pick right back up with a...
because we've seen it a million times before. Don't gaslight us.
A resumption of the conflict after we have left or turned our back. And so I think it's reasonable to expect Ukrainians to want some sort of guarantee, whether that's continued aid, continued equipment, or presence. They haven't. I don't know exactly what that looks like. Obviously, I would prefer to see Ukraine in NATO. We get better the day they join NATO. It's not going to happen anytime soon, especially if the United States is not willing to do it. And the Biden administration also is not willing to do it. But how do we end it when you're the partner on the other side, negotiating partner on the other side of the table is Vladimir Putin? I mean, there's no reason to have confidence that they will live up to any agreement, because there's nothing in their history. And I do appreciate that Andrew likes my North Florida accent.
Let me bring in Dave. I want to bring in Dave. We've got.
Yeah, I never quite understand this argument that seems to just logically fall apart, that we can't end a war because the war might pick up at some point in the future, and
and he claims to have logic on his side.
Therefore, if we don't have a perfect guarantee that, I mean, what, even if it...
Is Andrew laughing at him or with him? Once again, for all the people in the back, if the war stops temporarily and then picks back up, that's not an end, that's just a pause.
I mean, I don't know. I've heard the entire time through this war, including on your show, Piers, that if Putin was successful in Ukraine, then he was going to move on Poland, right? Like, this is what Joe Biden kept saying. This was the official, like, you know, fear-mongering of this war.
That's what the Kremlin is saying, buddy.
And so if you're telling me that even NATO membership isn't a guarantee, then yes, we never have a perfect guarantee. By the way, you also don't have a guarantee from any government in the history of the world. That doesn't mean that ending a war isn't still a positive. And I just want to go back to what was, you know, brought up initially. You know, the idea that this was a case of failed deterrence, and that if only we had deterred Vladimir Putin sooner, then we could have avoided this whole thing. I mean, let's just kind of quickly overlook the last 20 years of U.S. foreign policy in Europe. We've expanded NATO all the way to Vladimir Putin's borders. We constantly floated out the idea for years that we would include Ukraine at some point, give them full membership. We said point blank in 2008 at the Bucharest summit that we were bringing Georgia and Ukraine into NATO before Russia ended up going to war with Georgia there. And then we I mean, look, Piers, like we've done this before on the show too, right? But just imagine, if you can, have a little bit of strategic empathy and put yourself in the Russian shoes. If Russia...
But he's not a Putinist, right? To call him a Putinist is wrong. Empathize with a mass murderer, KGB agent, dictator, right? Empathize. Come on, let's toe the Kremlin line, but don't you dare call us Putinists. Is this guy retarded or just well paid?
Let's say the Soviet Union had never collapsed, and the Soviet Union had poured $100 million into a Mexican street protest that overthrew a democratically elected government, and they had been saying for years they were going to bring Mexico into their military alliance. And then when the new government came up, they recognized them immediately and started arming them, as Donald Trump foolishly bragged about the other day with Zelensky in the Oval Office. Piers, do you think Americans would feel that was deterrence, or do you think we might view that as a provocation? I mean, like, it's just...
Stop using logic, Dave.
No, but this isn't an analogous situation, and I've talked about it many, many times in many videos. This just isn't an honest analogy. I mean, just look at the geography and all the other players involved. It's not just the United States, right? It's whatever. This isn't... And besides, well, you would be against the United States intervening in Mexico and doing anything about it anyway, right? Because that's your policy. United States needs to look within and stop getting involved in these wars, while at the same time you're justifying Russia's expansion. You're saying it's wrong for United States to do this, but it's okay for Russia to do this. That's what he's saying, right? Let's contain the United States and expand Russia. But don't you dare call him a Putinist. I mean, the fucking hypocrisy is just appalling.
Using logic, Dave.
Logic. And this clown calls it logic. Right?
Well, look,
well, let me ask,
This is the rational right. A lot of their quote unquote debating is just to make fun of the crazy left lunatics.
Let me try and answer a very logical question. Let me get Jake to respond to that.
So, the first thing that he said, what is the concern if Russia takes Ukraine? If Russia can't even go 60 kilometers deep and take the city of Pokrovsk, what is the threat to NATO? And it's, yes, absorbing...
Well, yeah, Russia can't do it. That's why they need Donald Trump's help. That's why they're putting these maximalist demands. Give us Ukraine, back NATO up, right? If we get this peace that you say we should on Russia's terms, then that's just going to empower Russia, obviously, and weaken Europe and NATO by pushing it back. Seriously, is this guy retarded?
A country of 40 million people, absorbing a country that has $10 trillion of natural resources under the ground. It's the...
And almost 1 million man strong military with a fledgling, budding, very impressive, given the circumstances, military industrial sector. Innovative. And not only that, these almost 1 million people, they're experienced. They know how to fight modern warfare. A 2 million man army with these types of technologies, if US withdraws from Europe and Ukraine and Russia are united politically, they will run over Europe. Duh.
Strategic location on the Black Sea. If Russia absorbs Ukraine, they will Russify the people. They will annihilate the Ukrainian identity, turn them into Russians, and then start press ganging them into the military and send them into meat wave attacks against the Baltics, against Poland and the Suwalki Gap.
Which Andrew and his buddy are definitely against, right? Press ganging people into the military. Bad.
We're trying to prevent Russia from getting stronger. And I don't care about what Russia thinks or feels. Russia is not a great power. Russia...
Right? Why does he care so much about how Russia feels? Who cares? Why? Because he's being paid to care.
Has an economy the same size roughly as Spain. Do you think Spain is a great power that the United States should respect?
Exactly, dude. Listen. We are in the business of trying to be a world empire, and we're going broke. We're $36 trillion in debt because we can't afford to do it. We've blown $8 trillion in the last 20 years on foreign wars.
Why is Donald Trump talking about invading Greenland? Why is Donald Trump talking about invading Canada?
I don't agree with
Why
that.
is Donald Trump talking about annexing Canada?
Checkmate. I mean, there's nothing else. Just capitulate, right? Capitulate. Don't you want peace, bro? Just capitulate. You lost. Capitulate.
Why is he talking about ethnic
that has
cleansing
nothing
in
to
the
do with
Gaza
this
Strip?
conversation.
That is empire.
See, you lost red herring. You lost red herring. Stay on top.
Another projection. You just got owned big time. Right? You support Trump and his government, which is an expansionist empire. You support this shit, but you're trying to pretend like you don't.
For America to be a global empire.
Well, to be fair, it's not that yet, but he's planting the seeds. This is what he wants to do. He doesn't want to make friendly deals that are mutually beneficial for all the parties involved. He's talking about invading these countries. He's talking about military action. He's saying Canada is less friendly to the United States than Russia. Why? Because they're the old world order, and Russia is the new world order, as is Putin, are these two clowns on the left, the leftists.
Total red herring. Total red herring. Total red herring.
And by the way, I don't like
debate tactics, fallacy, Debate tactics. This this is what they got, really? Fallacy, fallacy. You can't talk anymore. Fallacy. What's the fallacy?
Like, go is the guy who smokes and spends all day arguing with strippers and OnlyFans girls going to speak up? I don't know.
See, that's your wheelhouse, Andrew Wilson. That is your wheelhouse. Dunking on dumbed down feminists, not the intelligent one, the dumb ones, and a bunch of hoes. That is your wheelhouse, bro. Okay? The reason why you're so successful in those debates is because, well, you pick on low-hanging fruit, and you tend to have the truth on your side. That's why you're successful in these debates. And the reason why you're sucking in this one is because you don't have truth on your side, as it's been amply demonstrated. You're failing, bro. You can't do it. But this is how they get you, right? They do the cultural war thing, which is easy pickings, right? Low-hanging fruit. They gain your support because you think they're so smart and intelligent and noble and morally correct, and they're just so smart. They win all their debates, right? Because they state the obvious. And then when they come to the table, after you have fallen in love with these people, they've established a certain cult of personality while being propped up by YouTube and the like, right? The fastest growing debate channel. He barely even debates. Debate channel on the internet. Clearly propped up. You gain all these naive, angsty, not fully developed yet boys, young men. You sneak into their fucking hearts in order to corrupt them with the bullshit, the lies, and this evil that's just emanating from you, obviously. What's up your nose, bro? You just told us that the two biggest Christian Orthodox countries on this planet are completely corrupt. I mean, I'm gonna cut this off right here, right now. This has gone on way too long. I thought this was very telling. What do you think?